And oh, they're recording us. How about that? My name is Sam Meekum. I'm a former township commissioner, and in fact was the liaison to the library board for a number of years. We're very proud of this facility, and well, may it go on forever.
Yes.
Today, though, the Historical Society, which is headquartered in the Stoner House, about 300 yards back behind this building, is proud to present Linda Ferich, who will give a talk today on native plants and backyard wildlife habitat certification. Linda retired from a career in emergency and occupational health nursing in 2013, becoming a PA Master Naturalist. In 2017, she started Lancaster Conservancy's Community Wildlife Habitat Program, a partnership with National Wildlife Federation. Linda trains habitat steward volunteers and does free property assessments to teach property owners how to develop habitat and control stormwater. Stormwater is a biggie these days. Through this program, Lancaster County has become the first county in the state to become a certified NWF community wildlife habitat. Linda enjoys studying native plants and designing ecological gardens as a certified Chesapeake Bay landscape professional and student of Mount Cuba Center's ecological gardening program. A few years ago, the Lancaster Native Plant Alliance was developed and recently became a chapter of PNPS. The Alliance wants to promote the use of native plants in all landscape settings through collaboration, education, and advocacy. Linda Ferich.
Thank you very much. Now that you've heard about me, I feel like I need to let you introduce yourselves, but I'm just kidding. We won't do that. But you know me. I do have 4 children, and we have a big 110-pound dog right now I'm dealing with. He was supposed to be a service dog. He flunked out of that program. So now we have a pet dog who's very big. So I'm busy, but we are all busy people, right? So I would like to mention I'm very much a needs-seen person. Maybe you've heard this term before, a calling is a need seen. I think it was Watchman Nee, who was a Chinese missionary, who first started writing about that in his book. So one of the first needs that I saw was that no one was testing streams in the southern end of Lancaster County. So in 2014, we started a stream testing group. That continues on now. I decided in January to stop coordinating that as well. And I'm just focused on community wildlife habitat now, which keeps me pretty busy. So I grew up on a farm, my grandfather's 100-acre farm. And I think that was the beginning of why I really like nature so much. My father used to take me for walks every Sunday and try to teach me about plants. But unfortunately, there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on at the farm, that relationship with nature where we were trying to control it. So there were a lot of chemicals floating around on the farm. Although we still had a lot of hedgerows around all the fields, we had a lot of forested land. So there was a lot to see as a little kid. And plus we had a little stream flowing between the house and the barn. So I spent a lot of time in the stream being chased by water snakes. But anyway, I'm hoping that we are finally moving away from some of this, but in my develop alone, I think I'm probably one of the only properties that has violets all through the yard, which a lot of people think is a weed, but it's actually a native wildflower. So there's still a lot of chemicals being used in my development. So a lot of us are familiar with National Wildlife Federation. That's one of the oldest nonprofit organizations in the nation that really cares about wildlife. I actually went through training in Delaware to become a host for habitat stewards with National Wildlife Federation. That was at Delaware Nature Center, which is not far from Mount Cuba. So this is one of their several programs. A lot of people have heard of backyard habitat, which they no longer call it that. And I'm glad they stopped calling it that, because we should have habitat the whole way around our yard, right? In the front, the sides, and the back, anywhere we can put it. I just was reading a statistic today To share suburbia with wildlife, we need to create corridors connecting natural areas by reducing lawn and beginning this transition from using alien ornamentals to native plants. Here is actually the statistic. 2 million acres, an area the size of Yellowstone National Park, are lost to development every single year. That comes from Nature Conservancy. And in the Chesapeake Bay watershed alone, we lose 100 acres of forest every day since 1985. So that's a lot. So when I was talking about the need seen thing in 2017, I was starting to read a lot about the loss of pollinators and birds, and you'll see there's a big connection between those species and all the lawn everywhere. So I was contemplating, what can we do? Is there any programs out there? So I found this program with National Wildlife Federation, and they no longer call their backyard habitat that program. They call it now Gardens for Wildlife. And then this program, Community Wildlife Habitat, was started. I'm not sure what year, but a community wildlife habitat can be any size. It could be your development. It could be your municipality. When we started looking at this, we thought, well, let's go big. So we decided that our community is the entire county of Lancaster. And yes, through that program, we had enough certified properties eventually. I think it was the fall of 2020 that we qualified to be the first county in the state to be certified. So I like what it says here. We certify yards, actually it's National Wildlife Federation that does that. Schoolyards, public areas like parks, community gardens, places of worship, and businesses. All those places can have habitat. We have great opportunity, don't we? It's unlimited. I know here there's always been a lot of native plantings at this park, and I think it's great. So I partnered with Lancaster Conservancy. Ferich Schroeder is my supervisor there. And when I approached him about this program, he was so excited because he felt that habitat was the one thing that was missing from Water Week. So they've incorporated that whole thing about habitat in the last couple of years. Lancaster Conservancy is a wonderful organization in the county. If you're not familiar with them, I would encourage you to become familiar. They've preserved over somewhere between 8,000 to 9,000 acres of land now. So that land is preserved forever. No one can go in there and develop any of that land. I just think that's awesome. Like I said, I grew up in Southern York County. There's no organization over there that's preserving land in York County. So the Conservancy is doing it over there now too. We have lots of land all through the River Hills. Great conservation corridor for wildlife to go up through. Maybe that's how we end up with some bear occasionally in Lancaster City. I don't know. So some of us are what I call Dr. Talamy groupies. I know that sounds extreme. I know Susan is. Dr. Talamy is a wonderful scientist. He's a professor of entomology at University of Delaware, and he has written these books. I do have some of his books up here. This was his first book, Bringing Nature Home. I'm not selling them or anything. I'm just have them here for you to glance through. I'm sure the library has them. And Debbie, I just told your husband to get you this book for Christmas. Sometimes she's back there clapping her hands. The Living Landscape is one of my favorite books that he has done. And he did this with his neighbor, Rick Dark, who's a nationally known photographer. So every late winter, I put it on the kitchen table and just start oohing and awing about all the scenes in here. They go through the different layers in the landscape. So the different layers are, you have the canopy, which are the larger trees, and then you have the understory trees like flowering dogwoods and redbuds, and then you have the shrub layer, and then there's perennials, and then the layer that most people forget about is the ground cover layer. So they go through all that. There's wonderful photos of some of their neighbors' properties and lots of photos of Mount Cuba. Has anyone been to Mount Cuba besides Susan? Good, great. That's one of my favorite places in the area, maybe on the planet. I call it the Native Plant Longwood Gardens. I'm in Lampeter. It only takes me about an hour and 15 minutes to get there. So I think Living Landscape was his second book, was Rick Dark. And then his third book is Nature's Best Hope, which is also laying up here. So there's a lot of very scary statistics in the beginning of this book, but it's one of those things that we all need to read to know how dire things are for the future generations. But the good thing is, as it's titled, Nature's Best Hope, that's us, and we can make a difference on our properties to help nature. So I've read a long time ago, you should never read screens like this or have too many words on a PowerPoint page, but I like what he says. This is from Dr. Talamy's, his old website, which he no longer has. But he says, we have destroyed natural habitat in so many places that local extinction is rampant and global extinction is accelerating. This is a growing problem for humanity because it is the plants and animals around us that produce the life support we all depend on. Every time a species is lost from an ecosystem, that ecosystem is less able to support us. There is a solution. 85% of the US is privately owned. So if we all focus on our properties and change it over for the wildlife, we can make a difference. So some people have heard of the food web. This is something similar, only this is a pyramid. If you look at the very bottom, those are plants. So basically, if we don't have native plants, we don't have the insects that rely on those plants. Like the classic is the monarch and the milkweed. You have to have milkweed for the monarch or there are no monarchs. That's just one example of many, many different insects. And then it goes on up the food chain. So if we don't have native plants, the rest of the pyramid totally collapses. I didn't know this for a long time, but 60% of a hummingbird's diet is actually insects, not flying around trying to find nectar at everyone's property. And there's a lot of issues with the nectar. It's very nice that we do that, but you can get a lot of bacteria in that. And the other thing that some of us don't think about is the invasive praying mantids that hang out on those nectar bottles waiting for the next hummingbird to come. Yes, we do have invasive praying mantids, not our native ones, and they're big enough that they capture a hummingbird. They don't eat them, but they will they'll strangle them and chomp into their heads. Sorry, I'm being a little gross there. But that's another reason that I personally won't hang a nectar feeder because of those invasive praying mantids. And if anyone wants to know the difference between those, I'll be happy to explain it to you afterwards. So this is an older graph, but this is the plight of the monarch. So they have decreased by 90%. So I'm sorry, I'm giving you some negative information right now, but it's one of those things we have to be aware of. I think on the West Coast, they were a little bit better last year, but they were essentially almost gone on the West Coast. But Xerces Society is a wonderful nonprofit national organization for pollinators, and they did help them a lot on the West Coast. So there was a little bit of an improvement. So our bumblebee is officially on an endangered species list. And in particular, it's the rusty patch bumblebee. We used to have a lot of those in Pennsylvania, not so much anymore. There's still some in Ohio, and a few other places, but all those different factors can affect our pollinators. It's so interesting to me how farming has even changed since when I was a child. Our animals used to just run around in the barnyard, and now we have big agribusiness, which can really make a difference. You know, we need farms, but we need biodiverse farms. It really helps a lot if we go in that direction. So, and speaking of farms, some of us who are older might know what a hedgerow is. A lot of farms had hedgerows, and so the ground nesting birds like the bobwhite and other birds used to live in hedgerows. If you came to my property, Susan's been there, you would see my hedgerow. I have a great big hedgerow at the end of my property just to honor the bobwhite and also to provide a lot of biodiversity. If you put in a hedgerow with different species of shrubs and trees that provide food to birds, you'll be amazed at the birds that come to your property. But 40% of the world's birds are in decline, and 1 in 8 is threatened with extinction, and 30% of our North American birds face decline. So the last time I heard of bobwhite, I got so excited, but then I found out the farmer was raising them, so it wasn't even a wild bobwhite. And I believe it was I can't think of the name of the organization, but they basically said it was, he's a mammologist for the Game Commission, sorry. They said that the bobwhite are essentially gone in our state now. So we have more than 4,000 wild bee species and lots of butterflies, flies. These are all pollinators, bats, beetles, and more than 35% of our food has to be pollinated. 90% of our flowers have to be pollinated. There's all sorts of crops that have to be pollinated. Honey, of course, all kinds of fruit, apples, peaches, apricots, bananas, melons, berries, onions, almonds. Some of my favorite is coffee and chocolate. And it's a really long list of foods that have to be pollinated. So it's crucial. So this photo was taken by Xerces Society. That is spelled X-E-R-C-E-S, if you ever want to look them up. X-E-R-C-E-S. I think it's named after a butterfly that went extinct in California after the plant that it relied on went away. So this is what a normal dairy case looks like. And this is what it'll look like in the fall. Just kidding, I hope not. I keep reading articles saying we're gonna have a major food shortage, but this is what our dairy case would look like without pollinators. So a lot of that is dairy products that have fruit and other things that have to be pollinated. I just found that interesting. So Dr. Talamy once again says we have some goals to succeed, to support diverse pollinator populations and complex food webs, to store carbon and to manage our watersheds. We need plants. The more plants we're putting in the ground, the better. I just read the other day that, you know, a lot of people don't like our clay soil because it holds so much moisture, but it actually is a very good soil to store carbon. So there's a good reason for our clay soil. So Dr. Talamy did a lot of research, and some of this comes from his own property. He just studied the caterpillars on the trees on his property. He basically started with, I don't know if it was 10 or 20 acres, but it was an old field, and he converted it to habitat. So in his research, and he always has doctorate students helping him to work on this stuff. The oak, and in particular, the white swamp oak, supports 534 species of caterpillars. So whenever I say that, I think of my good friend, Greg Wilson, who just passed away a couple of months ago. When we would go out to large properties together, we would start talking about this to the property owner. He would always say, if you're concerned about the caterpillars eating the leaves, stand back 20 feet, drink a beer, and forget about it. I just thought that was awesome. And everyone always laughs when I share that, but I'm honoring him to this day by continuing to tell people that they won't defoliate our native trees. And these plants that are listed do have to be native. So when it says willow there, the third one down, that cannot be a weeping willow. That has to be one of our native willows, like pussy willow. But it's interesting, my husband wanted to buy a pussy willow and he went to a nursery, which I won't name, a couple years ago. And I think he found 3 Asian pussy willows besides our native pussy willow. So it's just interesting how horticulture is always changing things, some things for the good. So it goes on down the list. The list I have that I give property owners has the top 20 woody species. And then on the right side there, it's perennials. So I tell everyone to please plant goldenrod and asters. There's some research that shows, and I think they're beautiful in the fall, but there's research that shows that the pollinators are attracted to that purple and gold color together. And so goldenrod and asters provide food to 227 different species are eating the leaves, but then it is also wonderful nectar for like the monarchs as they're migrating south again. So the native black cherry, some people think of black cherries as sort of being a junk tree because they grow all over the place, but they support 456 moths, caterpillars, and butterflies, and then 33 species of birds. So after reading that, I've learned to really like black cherries. And besides that, their bark's really neat. So in all my gardens, maybe I shouldn't say all gardens, but most of my gardens, I use violets as the ground cover. So if you Google violets, you will see lots of ways to get rid of violets, and it will also connect you to weed companies. But violets are actually native wildflowers. I like the little purple flower, and it's the host plant for the fritillary butterfly. It's that picture of that butterfly there, that little orange and blackish butterfly. And the other thing is in gardens, I haven't mulched for more than 15 years now. And so I'm saving a lot of money with that. And to me, mulching is very unsustainable. Why not plant violets or some other ground cover instead? And the gardens that I first planted violets in about that long ago, 15, 20 years ago, the violets are so thick that hardly anything else can come in there like a weed. I have other perennials and shrubs in there. They're all doing fine. The violets are not crowding them out. So here's the elements of a habitat area. Food, cover, water, places to raise young, and sustainable gardening practices. So it's not only National Wildlife Federation that says this. Audubon has the same list. A lot of different organizations do. So we're going to go through each one of these. Food, there's lots of fruits. The black haw viburnum and dogwood shrubs have wonderful fruit for the birds. The hazelnut, I see those little husky looking things with the nut on the inside in that picture, left upper. I see those forming. I go out the next week to see if I can get any nuts. They're all gone. The birds and mammals just attack those. And then there's seeds in pine cones and the seeds on different flowers. If we have native plants, we'll provide a lot of food for our wildlife. So 97% of our birds require bugs. My daughter's a forester. She hates that word bugs. She said it should say insects. I still haven't changed it. She told me that 5 years ago. So that means they feed their babies caterpillars. They don't feed them seeds or nuts or anything hard like that. Their throats were designed to swallow soft bodies like caterpillars. So essentially, once again, if you don't have native plants, you don't have the caterpillars that eat those native plants, so then you don't have baby birds. There's a big connection there. I didn't know that for a long time. I'm glad to know that now. So this is just some example of different leaves that will feed the caterpillars. The oak we already saw is providing food to more than 500, and it's particularly the white oak that does that, but any oak is great. There at the bottom center, that's a cute little fritillary caterpillar eating that violet leaf. I've seen those. They're precious. They sometimes they're hard to see because they're on the underside of the leaf, and you don't see them till almost mid-fall. But their chrysalis are beautiful. They look like pieces of jewelry. I found one on the garage door one day. It's turquoise and gold, just beautiful. There's the Dutchman's pipe. It's eating the pipe vine. I've never seen one of these on my pipe vine yet. And, but I've heard plenty of people have seen them, but that's a beautiful swallowtail butterfly, the pipe vine swallowtail. And there up at the top is our star. That's our little monarch eating butterfly weed. That butterfly weed, I think, is my favorite wildflower. Does anyone else grow that in here? It's a wonderful milkweed. If this is the ground, it only gets about this big and it has a bright orange flower. I just love it. So cover is important, different examples of that. So we'll talk about leaves in a little bit later here, but there is a photo there of some tulips or something coming up through leaves. Food and shelter in the winter is important. So maybe don't be a clean nut this winter. Leave the stems up. And there's a couple of reasons why you want to leave the stems up. You can feed the birds with certain flowers, dried flowers, like purple cone flowers. The different rudbeckias will provide seed to the birds. Dead trees and snags, if it's in a safe area, let it stand. The woodpeckers will definitely get the insects out of that, or maybe make a nest. Leaf litter is important, and you can use feeders and the seed heads I already mentioned. I only feed the birds in the winter time because I have so many native plants on my property that there's plenty of food for them. So in the winter, though, you have to be careful. You don't want to have all your feed in a very concentrated area, because if a diseased bird comes into that area, it can spread the disease. So I actually take the black oiled sunflower seeds and throw them out in the driveway. And I figure it's every bird for himself, go find some. And then I put suet in one spot for the woodpeckers and bluebirds. And then I put finch feed in another separate area. So it's not so concentrated. Water, that's pretty self-explanatory. So we don't all have a big pond or the Conestoga River flowing close to our house, like some of us are blessed with. But I recommend when I go out to property owners to take the top of a bird bath or a plant tray, you know, like the base of the pots, the tray that oftentimes you can buy separate. Put rocks in that so that the bees are not drowning in the summertime in that water, and then just flush it off once a week to get so that the mosquitoes don't have enough time to develop. And that to me is so much easier. I just put those in different gardens, so there's plenty of water for the pollinators, and the birds will use that too. Raising young is another important part of habitat. So if you have native plants, you're raising young, all the caterpillars. There is in the bottom center, there's a picture of the bee nest that you can make yourself. They have to be cleaned out every year though. And so I recommend not making big elaborate ones of those, because if there's bacteria or some mite or something, then it's a problem. So you can make small of those and just clean it out every year. And native plants are important food. So those are some different examples there. We have the dogwood, which is a great pollinator flower. And then also the red berries are providing food. So the Asian dogwoods are not providing that same service that our American dogwoods do. There's a picture of the pipevine flower. It looks like a little pipe. Hollies are great. There's a lot of different types of hollies, so aim for the American holly, but they sure hurt when they stick in your fingers, don't they? And blueberries, and then up there at the top, that's a blue lobelia. There's red lobelia and blue lobelia. The hummingbirds love those, and also the butterflies. So see that big wasp there? I'm really not afraid of them. They're a good 2 inches. But yeah. So it's called the great black wasp. It has those beautiful blue wings. The plant that it's on is called mountain mint. Has anyone heard of that one? There's like 4 different species of mountain mint. My husband and I love to go out in the backyard and just stare at the mountain mint. I've counted as many as 40 different species of pollinators, including beetles and all sorts of insects. So, and the other interesting thing about this wasp is that it's part of integrated pest management. It will lay its egg in the same hole as the Japanese beetle larva. So then the baby wasp will eat the Japanese beetle larva. So we have a mountain mint all over our yard. I really don't see many Japanese beetles anymore. Last year, we did get a few on our American linden tree. They love American linden. I'm not sure about the European linden, but we took care of those. So there's lots of different resources out there to start studying native plants. I love going to some of the local nurseries. If we come out to your property, we actually have a list of nurseries, retail, and then events like the Overlook Native Plant Sale, and also wholesale places. And the wholesale places, they're great websites for you to just start looking at and study native plants. But you can go to this National Wildlife Federation site. Audubon has something similar. You put in your zip code at this site and it will give you a whole list of native plants that are native to your area. So we're going to talk a little bit about sustainable practices for wildlife. Now, some of this is a bit different for some people, so keep your mind open to some cultural shifts. It is a little bit of a challenge in this county, and I think in York County as well, because we like our gardens to be perfectly clean. So we should be leaving the leaves, and that doesn't mean leave them on the lawn. That means, are you agreeing with that or disagreeing?
We're agreeing with that.
Oh, good. It's a lot less work for you, except for gently blowing them. My husband uses a blower, and he just gently blows the leaves over to the gardens. If you get the blower too close to the leaves, it's like a tornado hitting the insects. But why this is so important is that our beneficial insects are at different stages in their life cycle. So we hardly ever see hummingbird moths anymore because they're actually cocoons in the leaves in the winter months. Lightning bugs will go in under leaves. Some butterflies are in the adult phase. Some of them are actually only eggs. So this is why the leaves are so important. So the practice of mulching them, so some people say, oh, I leave the leaves. I'm like, okay, well, what do you do to the leaves? They're like, I mulch them first. I'm like, stop mulching. Because that will chop them all up. So just gently rake them or gently blow them over into the gardens. Some of the neighbors are actually bringing their gardens, I wish they'd bring their gardens to me, their leaves to me. And it's amazing. It might be a stack this big in the fall, but by spring, it really goes down. And of course, some of them probably just blow all over the place, but that's okay. So this is written by Heather Home, Heather Home is a bee expert in the Midwest, and she talks a lot about our native bees. What can we do to help them? So Xerces Society does talk about the fact that all the honeybees are in competition with our native bees. So that's a bit of a factor, but I love honey. But I tell the honeybee guys, just make sure you're planting enough nectar and pollen plants for your honeybees and the native bees both. So these are some tips from her. Learn about the plants that are native to your area. Don't use pesticides. Expand the wild area of your yard, and don't clean up much in the fall and winter. So speaking of pesticides, you have to be very careful what nursery you go to. There's something called neonicotinoids. It's a systemic insecticide. It goes all throughout the plant. So there's a couple different kinds. There's one type that's sprayed on the plant that is only on the plant for 7 days. So maybe if you got one of those plants and you didn't plant it in your garden for a week, it would be okay. But sometimes you don't know when you're buying a plant at that nursery if they're also using the type that is mixed in the soil. And Bayer, which used to be Monsanto, is very proud of the fact that the type of neonicotinoid that is mixed in the soil is active for over 7 years. It's somewhere close to 8 years. So that insecticide goes out to the pollen, the seeds, the nectar, all through the plant, the flower. So if you, in good conscience, buy a milkweed at a place that is using the neonicotinoid in the soil, it's being pulled up into that milkweed. And when the monarch puts its egg on that, as soon as it starts eating the leaves like it's supposed to, it's going to die. So it's a problem. And there are nurseries we know of that do not use neonicotinoids. And that's a list we have when we go out to properties, we provide that. So that's that same list that has the retail, events, and wholesale nurseries. Connie Schmotzer, who used to be the York County Master Gardener Leader, puts out that list every year. We let her know if there's any new nurseries, so she puts out a new list every single year. She's now no longer the leader at York County. She's in charge of the Penn State certification program. Any questions about neonicotinoids? I think they have been outlawed in Europe now. I keep hearing that. I hope that's correct. So Heather wrote this also, our small cavity nesting bees need hollow stems. So what some people do is they actually let those stems up all year round, and then nature will they'll just naturally break apart and fall down. But you cut them at varying heights, and because some native bees will actually use the same stem over and over again. But I don't know the percentage of our bees that use stems like that, but I never cut anything the whole way down to the ground in case there's nests in there. So which would you choose? The unsustainable lawn, which looks like there's not one violet in there, or the life-giving meadow. But not to say a meadow doesn't need maintenance. When you plant a meadow, if you plant it thickly and you cover every area on the ground, it's less maintenance because things can't come in there as easy because that's a very thick planting. And when I do plantings of gardens, I plant thickly like that, and I make sure the ground is covered. And you can use mulch the first year, but then you shouldn't have to use mulch after that. So a lot of times it'll say on the plant on the label to plant it about 12 inches apart. I push it to 8 or 10 inches and just plant closely, and things will close up that way. So I always like to talk about invasives a little bit. So when we go out to properties, we do point out any invasive species that are on there. So this is just some examples: burning bush, ivy, Japanese barberry, which is now also on the noxious weed list, which means, did you want to say something to her? Did you want to say something? No? Okay.
I'm seeing bamboo and
Oh, yes.
ultimate and invasive.
Yeah, it is. It's a real bugger to get rid of. Japanese barberry is now on the noxious weed list. It went on there a couple months ago. I'm so happy it's on there because the only sad thing about that is they still can sell it for 2 more years. But after that, no one will be able to buy it. Bamboo, the periwinkle, butterfly bush, which disappoints a lot of people that that's on there. I can come back to that. Bradford pear is also now on the noxious weed list. And I do have to say they did an excellent job getting rid of the Bradford pear that used to be all over this park. The daylily and spirea. So the common daylily and the Japanese spirea were both put on the invasive list because if they get in the floodplain, they go through the area and they attach to stream banks. I've seen a lot of daylily along streams and I haven't seen the spirea, but that's what I'm told happens. So butterfly bush, it's not a native plant. It's an Asian species. And so nothing can eat it. The seeds go everywhere. That is one plant that Penn State completed a study on, and the nutrition of butterfly bush is really bad for the pollinators. So and does everyone know why a plant is deemed as invasive? I mean, it wasn't here before the colonialists came over, or the botanists who came over in the 1700s and 1800s started bringing these plants over here. But the other issue is they're replacing our native species. To me, the worst are the ones that make berries. The burning bush, privet's not even on here. Burning bush, privet, and barberry make berries that the birds eat, and then they poop them out in the woods, and then they spread like crazy. My daughter just bought a property up in Senator County. It's a large wet meadow on her property. It's covered with privet. She's gonna be working on that for years. So they replace our natives. They haven't been here for a long time. And since they haven't been here for a long time, like you'll hear people say, well, can't our wildlife get used to these plants? It takes thousands of years. Our insects and birds have co-evolved with the native plants we have, and they rely on those plants. Nothing relies on these plants except lanternfly and maybe some other Asian species. So I like to include this one. It's not invasive in our state yet, but I like to tell everyone about this. Nandina domestica. I don't see any out here, but I see it a lot at institutions. Developments, homeowners association, it's everywhere. It's got a little white flower, and then it gets these bright red berries. So you've probably seen them. I wish that was a close-up of the leaf. I'm sure you would recognize it. It's called heavenly bamboo as well, is the common name, Nandina domestica. But so they have found flocks of cedar waxwings dead. Everyone know what a cedar waxwing is. They have the same behavior that robins do in late winter, real early spring. They'll come into an area and they'll gorge themselves on berries. Robins have been known to get a little altered from eating a lot of crab apples. But yeah, so if they have found flocks of cedar waxwings dead, and they did autopsies on them, and that's the berry that was found inside the cedar waxwings. This berry, and also cotoneasters, which a lot of us have. So, you know, if you have those plants, at least cut off the berries before the birds come flying back in late winter. It is now invasive in some of the southern states as well. So I don't know, maybe eventually it will become invasive up here. Yeah, Nandina domestica, N-A-N-D-I-N-A, domestica, D-O-M-E-S-T-I-C-A, and it's called heavenly bamboo. It's not very heavenly. Sure. So we always like to talk about stormwater as well. When we go out to properties, if we see an area that has a lot of erosion or people need a buffer next to a stream, we'll point those things out to them. And sometimes people are contacting us because they want to know how to put a rain garden in or something else. So that's this section. So there's different ways that you can control stormwater. I like rain gardens a lot. You can use a rain barrel. You can adjust the downspout so that it's going into an area where there's a lot of plants. You can aerate your compacted soil, and you could have buffers along streams and ponds. So down there on the right lower, that's a buffer. You don't see many trees or shrubs, but they have the plants growing right up to the stream. So, and actually putting a vegetated buffer around a stream is great if you want to keep geese away. They will not land in a pond that has a whole lot of plants around it. So reducing lawn, I mentioned this earlier, 40 million acres of lawn in the US. That's our #1 crop in this nation. We're not getting much out of it except for Japanese beetles, right? So if you could see that little chart up there, that Kentucky bluegrass has a very small root system. Although I swear every time I'm digging it out, that root system's a lot bigger than that picture. But then the Indian grass, all those native grasses have wonderful, very long root systems. So the goal is to reduce lawn for numerous reasons. I do have on that table, there's a tip sheet from National Wildlife Federation on why reducing lawn is important. This is just 3 examples of rain gardens. So probably 20 years ago, well, we built our house 30 years ago, and our house sits lower than another section of the development. And according to an Amish family I met out on Lampeter Road, they said, I'm right in Lampeter, they said that our development was wetlands. It was a farm and wetlands, and I believe it. Every time it rains, we have 2 sump pumps that are just shooting water out. And also someone found some tiles when our house was being built, which was a way to control wetland areas so that you could farm that area. But anyway, the developer's answer for our property was to have straw bales every couple feet to control the storm water that was flying down through. I'm like, I don't think I want straw bales for the next 20 years that's sitting there. So I came up with this idea to divert water into a depressed garden that would collect the water, and I would grow Joe Pye weed in there and other plants. And then about 5 years after that, they started talking about rain gardens. So I just thought that was really funny. But we had that 1 rain garden for a long time. And with the increase of rain the last couple of years, I noticed still a lot of water going down the side of our property. So I developed my big hedgerow and some more gardens, which are absorbing a lot of stormwater. You don't really see much water coming off of our property like you do some of the other ones. So basically, plants are the answer. So you could put in a little large swale and the water will flow in there, but the swales that have the plants in are even better. And I'm so thankful that a lot of municipalities are actually moving in that direction. So I just saw this little picture one time on Facebook. I loved it. I asked them if I could use it and they said yes. So that's the future of conservation. And this is something we all can do. We, you know, it's so easy to be overwhelmed by multiple things in the world right now, but if we can each do a little something to help the wildlife and improve the air quality around you, you know, let's go for it. Some things we don't have any control on, but this is something we all can do. So this is the front of my house. That buffer area is over there on the left. So I'm so happy we're on the Sugar Maple Street. there are two streets in our development. One was the Bradford Pear Street and the other one was the Sugar Maple. Most of the Bradford pears are now blown over, but there's still some that are spreading around on the other street. But I have grass paths. That's how I use lawn. We're right across from the LS school campus. So even if a little family buys our property someday, the kids can all play across the street. So I don't think we'll have a resale problem. I did make a big mistake. That tree on the right there, the smaller tree, is a red bud. And if you look where they grow in plant community, they grow as an understory tree. So that poor red bud is struggling and the bark's falling off of it. We really shouldn't be planting them in full sun. That's the end of my buffer. That big shrub there is called a button bush. A botanist friend came over to look at it because I told him how big it was. He said, they don't get that big. So he came and looked at it and said, oh, well, yours did. But that is all mountain mint there in the bottom. That major green area there at the bottom underneath the button bush have a lot of mountain mint. I love button bush. It has these big round COVID looking flowers that really attracts butterflies. When we had a lot of butterflies, I haven't seen many the last couple of years, I hate to say. So these are the goals of our Lancaster Conservancy Community Wildlife Habitat. So educational outreach, protecting and promoting native plant species, invasive species removal. We have helped several churches and property owners remove massive amounts of burning bush. Certify our county, that's done. Establish wildlife corridors and assist our partners in their efforts. So we do a lot with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, Donegal Trout, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We try to support them and all the work they do. As far as the wildlife corridors, I believe they are developing. If you go to School Lane Hills now, you'll see a lot of properties with native plants. The habitat stewards who are trained, I was at one of their homes this morning. 3 of her neighbors now have habitat on their property, which is awesome. So one thing we want to do, hopefully it'll be done this fall, we want to have a digital map of all the NWF certified properties. I don't know any other way to track it, but NWF they send me the list of the properties that are certified. So we want to make a digital map to show where these corridors are developing all through the county. And it will be confidential. It wouldn't show anyone's address or GPS coordinates. So this is what I love to do. I need to get a different picture though, because that's not all native in the background there, but a lot of it is. So I go out and do free property assessments. You just send me an email. I'm a retired nurse, so I have the time to do this. My husband's very supportive. On the average, I spend about 2 hours with a property owner. We identify the plants that are on the property, and then we have a whole packet of educational material. So this garden is at the history.org on the corner of President and Marietta Avenue. So we did this garden, pollinator garden, with Tanger Arboretum. It was a big effort with a lot of different groups, master gardeners, master naturalists, habitat stewards, and Muhlenberg Botanical Society. I love to look at that garden. So at Moravian Manor, they have courtyards inside the buildings. This was one courtyard we did, which is off of skilled care. This is what it looked like right after we planted it. You can't see much there. I have some more photos I need to add, but this is one section of the Rudbeckia that was blooming. So there's a volunteer resident there that coordinates a group to do maintenance. They go in there every month and pull weeds. But they're already seeing butterflies and hummingbird in there. It was just really neat. So through that effort and others, we've learned the importance of maintenance. Maintenance is key anytime you put in a garden, right? If you put in a garden at a retirement community or school or somewhere and no one's maintaining it, you might as well forget about it. And that's what happened here. A friend put in this garden with a bunch of fourth graders. It was the Warwick Watershed Day, and then no one maintained it. So it just got covered with weeds. And I went in there with some other people to try to fix it, but there were little vole huts. Have you ever seen a vole hut? They're little houses. I didn't know what it was at first. It was like this little mound of dried leaves. And I thought, what is that? I poked it and it squeaked. So then I knew, oh, that's a vole. I looked it up. But anyway, covered with vole huts and weeds. But anyway, thank goodness our friend Greg Wilson went in there with Warwick Township and they just made it all into a big meadow then. So that took care of that problem. This is at Lancaster Cemetery. They have all these family plots that no one visits anymore. They're surrounded by a small stone wall or cement wall. And so it was the perfect area for pollinator garden. Schoolyard habitat. When we first started this group, we had a committee that was working with schools and another committee that was working with churches. So Elise Jurgen developed this whole program in Lancaster County, and she's doing a lot with the schools in Lancaster City. So that developed out of the committee, but it's an actual program now with National Wildlife. And then I'm involved with this. I go out to churches and talk to them about the property they have, what they can do. One really neat thing is if a property has at least a half an acre of lawn, the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, Ryan Davis in particular, will come in there and plant a forest of trees and shrubs. So it's a great way to stop mowing and you have a forest on your land. And here's our partners. So Lancaster Conservancy, but lots of different groups that we're working with. And that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions about anything at all? Yes.
I have so many questions.
Okay. Oh, I'm so happy that you have questions.
First of all, you mentioned purple cone flower.
Yes.
Is that a native plant?
It is, but in reality, it's not native to our area, but it is native to the Northeast. It's actually a prairie plant. So you'll see it in a lot of properties. Yeah. Yeah.
I always hear people say, oh, that's not native.
That's correct. It's not a local native plant, but close enough.
Okay.
And the really nice thing is that in the wintertime, or as soon as the seeds are ripe, you'll see goldfinches sitting on there, pulling the seeds out, eating them. I love to see that.
All right. The other thing, I'm going to tell this as fast as I can.
Okay.
Again, not the monopoly. I live in a condo development.
HOA?
Yeah. And
do we want to continue this or the recording? I'm just wondering if we need to continue the recording part. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you might not want to mention the HOA, but then go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
just background.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And there happens to be a 5.5 acre field where they initially intended to build. They couldn't because it floods because there's a creek that runs along Sam. You know the place.
Great place for a buffer.
Yeah. Well, Sam, we were a commissioner who came over and visited when we did the planning. I'm not going to say where it is.
Yeah. Sam already knows. Yeah.
Well, he would, because he was commissioner then and he came over when we had planning day. So we used to mow that all the time. Well, first of all, we put chemicals on.
And that all went in the creek.
We used to mow it all the time. And people were like, the township would come by and they'd say, you have to mow your lawn or you're going to get fined. Meaning this field. So a couple of people, 3 or 4 people got together. I wasn't a part of the group, but I was supportive of it. And they decided to get that 5.5 acres certified as a meadow. So the township wouldn't require us to mow it anymore. I mean, it had to be mowed a couple times for maintenance purposes.
Right.
And it was beautiful for a few years. It was absolutely, random people, you'd see them stop their cars and get out and walk around.
Wow.
It was really nice. The people that were the driving force behind that no longer live on the property. And so of course they've gone back to mowing the grass again.
I think I know where the property is.
Yeah. know, they don't put chemicals in that field, but they do on the rest of the property. My question is, how do you make people like that understand that they got to stop doing this nonsense?
So it's interesting. This year, I've actually had 2 or 3 HOAs reach out to me, which was really exciting to me because I'm like, okay, we need to switch over some of the landscaping practices and the plants that are very specifically the exotic species that are used over and over again. So a situation like that, it's great to have a committee. Like if there's a landscaping committee, it's great to have, or a group of people that care about that area. So if there's a stream there, even better than tall grass would be trees and shrubs. And you can get that for free. And they do free maintenance for 3 years. You know, that's all through the Alliance. So it's hard if you're trying to do a meadow. I love meadows personally. And one of my favorite writers on meadows is Larry Weiner. It's W-E-A-N-E-R. And I have friends in Muhlenberg that have a beautiful meadow, but it's a lot of maintenance.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily maintained correctly over time, especially once those folks that were sort of driving force, once they left.
And the other thing is, if it starts out as a lawn, it's going to be a lawn, and you will have all that exotic grass growing in there. And if you have this vision where it's going to be like that meadow in there, it's just not going to happen. I have a friend that tried to put a meadow in her regular lawn. So she left her lawn grow and then she started plugging things in. But for the last 10 years, she's still removing lawn grass. It's a lot of work. Ideally, when people do meadows, they kill off all the lawn first and then they seed it with a meadow mix. And it takes a good 3 years for that to look nice. But for a situation, that's perfect for a buffer. If I went out to that property and looked at it from what you're describing, I think I would recommend the Alliance for the Bay to go there and plant it full of trees and shrubs that will provide habitat, a biodiverse habitat. So it's a little easier than trying to maintain a big meadow.
Yeah, they're just so.
Yeah, and that's why it's good for people to get involved in the HOA, you know?
Well, yes.
Yeah. To make a difference and to have support, you know?
Well, I think that's what's lacking. I think that's what sort of happened.
It's hard.
We're sort of doing this, which is people that live there, they weren't on the condo board. You know, they had quite a debate with the condo board. To even want to move forward with this, but you know.
Yeah, a wonderful website is The Humane Gardener. She has a blog post and a book by that same name, The Humane Gardener. And she helped her sister in Maryland get a law passed that prevents an HOA from preventing a HOA member from planting habitat. That's in the state of Maryland. They cannot prevent you from planting habitat now in Maryland HOAs. I hope that made sense the way I kept saying double negatives. It was triple negatives even. Did you have a question?
I did. So my area, most of the flowers and plants that I saw on there, they needed a fair amount of sunshine. I have areas that are not all that sunny. I get limited amount of sunny. So on those websites, will it give me information of natives that could be planted in areas that have to not make sun?
Well, something I learned a couple years ago, that full sun is only 6 hours per day. I was surprised by that. I always thought it had to be the whole day. So it's only 6, part sun's only 4, and then shade is 2 or less. So I'm not sure if they do. It might say the light requirements, but
I think they do.
Do they? We did design a flyer for the new, a couple years ago, the Habitat Stewards got together and designed a flyer. If you go to Lancaster Conservancy and there's a tab that says what we do, And if you just click on that, community wildlife habitat is one of the options. And we have all kinds of resources, including that sheet. So that flyer we designed was for the new native plant gardener. The plants on there are readily available at the nurseries you want to go to, and our clay soil. So we don't have blueberries on there because most people would have to amend the soil to grow blueberries. We don't have New Jersey tea on there, which you would see on a lot of lists, including from Penn State, that you should grow New Jersey tea, but it likes acid soil. So it's basically the clay soil we have, but on there we have the light, the moisture, and the habitat value of those plants. So about 1.5 pages is perennials. There's a small area of vines and a small area of grasses, the smaller grasses like little blue stem and stuff. Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
How do you tell the difference between prairie races? Because the ones I have around my house, like having spotted lanternflies, snack ball.
Yeah, well, think about the fact that if they're Asian praying mantids, that makes sense, right? That they would like Asian lanternflies. So you tell, there's some really good links online. So the round puffy egg cases are the Asian species. And I remember years ago yelling at my husband because he was burning a bunch of them on some grasses we had. And that's a big myth, that you can't kill praying mantids, especially those. There's no fine related to it. So the round puffy ones are the Asian. So any of those I see, I smash them or put them in a baggie. So you look at the wing pad, you know, how long the wings are on the insect. The Asian one, the wings go the whole way to the end of the body. Our native praying mantids are a little fatter body and the wings don't go the whole way. So most of them that we see are the Asian species, and yeah, they're awful. So I kill every single one of those I see because they kill a lot of pollinators, and I don't want to gross you out again about the hummingbird. I know I grossed you out when I said that a while ago, I'm sorry. I've seen the videos, it's hard to believe. They don't eat the whole hummingbird, they just kill it and sort of have a little snack on it, and that's it. So, but there's some really good links on the internet. Just Google, compare the native with non-native praying mantids, and you'll see all kinds of stuff.
You mentioned getting soil ready for blueberries.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I don't do, I mean, years ago, I had blueberries in a big ceramic pot out on our deck, and I would put coffee grounds in there. They say that doesn't work, but it seemed to work for those. But I'm like, okay, I'm done with you guys needing coffee grounds. So I planted them in the yard. They lived maybe 2 years. My soil is very clay. Serviceberry is a wonderful substitute for blueberries. It's a small tree, very large shrub, depending on the species. It tastes just like a blueberry with the seed on the inside, reminds you of a little nut that you crunch through. So right now they're very ripe. When you have a small tree though, you won't get any for a long time because the birds just sit on those trees waiting to eat them. My service berries are probably 15 years old now, and since last year I've been eating a lot. I get a lot of berries now to eat. A lot of people make desserts out of them. They're delicious. You have a service berry, Susan?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you get any berries yet, or are the birds still beating you?
Birds.
Yeah. I had a whole flock of cedar waxwings just come and sit and look at the berries and then leave because they weren't ready yet. But so you're welcome to look at any of these books up here. So you know Dr. Talamy's writing, and all that is free over there too. This book was written by our friend